announcement on sanctions, and as always, I will be back after to answer your questions.
Thank you. Today, the Trump administration is continuing its efforts against the government of North Korea. Despite multiple UN Security Council resolutions imposing international sanctions, the government of North Korea continues its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Today, Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network has found the Bank of Dandong to be a foreign financial institution of primary money laundering concern under Section 311 of the USA Patriot Act. This bank has served as a gateway for North Korea to access the U.S. and international financial systems, facilitating millions of dollars of transactions for companies involved in North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. The United States will not stand for such action. This will require U.S. banks to ensure that the Bank of Dandong does not access the U.S. financial system directly or indirectly through other foreign banks. This action reaffirms the Treasury Department's commitment to ensure that North Korea is cut off from the U.S. financial system. In addition, the Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control has sanctioned 2 individuals and 1 entity for their continued support of North Korea's activities. While today's actions are directed at Chinese individuals and entities, we look forward to continuing working closely with the government of China to stop illicit financing involving North Korea. We are in no way targeting China with these actions. We will be meeting with China and other countries at the G20 next week to further our efforts to cut off North Korea's illicit activities. North Korea's provocative, destabilizing, and inhumane behavior will not be tolerated. We are committed to targeting North Korea's external enablers and maximizing economic pressure on the regime until it ceases its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. North Korea. Recently, the congressman introduced about the North Korea travel bans. Do Treasury Department have any guideline for the North Korean Travel Ban Act?
I have no comments on that today, although I will say we will continue to look at a range of options as we are very serious about them stopping their activity.
Can you quantify the financial activity that you're trying to stop today and the access, direct and indirect, this particular bank had to the U.S. financial markets?
Well, this is very significant since this is the first bank that we've cut off under this, and that we will continue to look at these actions and continue to roll out sanctions. As I said, in this case, it's millions of dollars, but we are committed to cutting off all illegal funds going to North Korea.
You explain how it works, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, so when we put sanctions,
What they're doing now and what you're trying to stop.
this bank will not be able to access the U.S. financial system either directly or indirectly, so it's a very significant action.
Secretary, you made clear that this was not a punishment against China, but obviously the White House wants to be putting pressure on Beijing to take action against North Korea. Are you satisfied that China will see it that way, and with what China is doing currently against North Korea?
Well, I think, as you know, President Trump and President Xi have had very productive conversations about North Korea, and we appreciate their work and hope they will continue to work with us. Notwithstanding that, we are taking these actions to show the seriousness in which we are going to deal with this. In the back.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Can you talk more about the link between this specific bank and the government of North Korea? We're trying to get a better picture of what exactly they were funding in North Korea.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into the specifics of that because it does involve certain intelligence, but again, I can tell you we have very specific intelligence, and again, we will follow the money and cut off the money.
Mr. Secretary, would you be able to explain to us, I know you did the research, the actual economic impact this is going to have on the North Koreans and how that economic impact negatively may cause them a change in their position.
Well, I think, as you know, in Iran, the sanctions were very effective, and that's what's brought Iran to the table. And we will continue to work with our allies, and we will continue to speak to people at the G20. We are firmly committed to work with other nations to cut off illicit financing.
Mr. Secretary, was China given a heads up in any way about the action that you're announcing today? And you used a term that in your statement. Is China an enabler as it relates to North Korea?
Again, I'm not going to comment specifically on our behind-the-scenes conversations. We've obviously had very productive conversations with them. Again, as I said, this is not directed at China. This is directed at a bank, as well as individuals and entities in China. And again, whether in China or there anyone else, we will continue with sanctions.
Korea simply move their assets from this particular bank to another bank in China? Are they permissible to do
Again,
that?
if we find other activity, we will sanction other entities. Nobody's off limits.
Quick follow-up on China. Can you just characterize whether you think China's doing enough? Because last week the president tweeted, while I greatly appreciate the efforts of President Xi in China to help with North Korea, it has not worked out. At least I know China tried. It sounded like he was giving up on China. Has he?
I don't think the president is giving up in any sense. I think we will continue to work with China and everyone else. The president is firmly committed that we will cut the money off to North Korea until they behave properly.
Any asks of South Korea? Any asks of the South Korean leader
If
today?
you don't mind. Two different topics. One, how much do you feel that China can actually move the needle on North Korea? Two, in terms of tax reform, you say you've got 100 folks over there roughly at the Treasury Department dealing with that issue. Are there any contingency plans in place in case healthcare doesn't get done? And thirdly, Janet Yellen, how much is the administration seriously considering her to remain on as Fed chair?
Well, that's an awful lot of questions. So let me work backwards. Again, no decisions have been made in regards to the Fed chair. Gary Cohn and I will at some point make recommendations to the president, but no decisions have been made on that. In regards to tax reform, I think, as you've heard Gary and I say, we are very committed to get tax reform done this year. It is one of the president's top priorities for economic growth. I think the people of America understand that we need economic growth, and we're committed to doing that. I expect that healthcare hopefully will get done, but regardless, we are committed to getting tax reform done. And you had so many questions, I forgot your first one.
And how much, well, let me actually follow up with you on tax reform, if you don't mind. Paul Ryan had said today that things are on track. Why should the American public believe that things are actually on track with what we see what's going on with healthcare reform, and it seems like the timeline keeps getting pushed?
Oh, well, why shouldn't the American public believe it? Of course they should believe it. We've said that. Speaker Ryan has said that. Chairman Hatch has said it. We are all 100% committed to getting tax reform done this year.
Question on the sanctions, Secretary. In February, you received a letter from lawmakers suggesting that the Treasury Department should consider sanctioning the Bank of China. My question to you is, have you reconsidered that idea? Do you think that idea is on the table? And then the second question I had is about the debt ceiling. My understanding is that the debt ceiling drop dead time for you all is October. Does that give Congress additional time in your mind, or would you still like them to act earlier?
I haven't given any specifics in regards to the drop dead date. What I have said is that I hope that Congress acts before they leave. Yet we do have contingency plans if they don't, so that the market shouldn't be concerned. But again, I think for the benefit of everybody, the sooner that they do this, the better. And as it relates to banks, again, I think as you've seen, we've taken very significant action today. We will continue to take very significant action, rolling out additional sanctions on North Korea until they stop their behavior.
Secretary, one question on indirect access to the banking system. Are you aware of other banks that are providing similar access to North Korea, to the international financial system, and what other banks are you prepared to take steps against going forward?
Again, let me just say, we have a team of people, both in Treasury and working with the intelligence agencies, and as we see other banks or individuals or entities, you can expect we will continue to roll out additional sanctions. This is something we take very seriously. We will be having discussions with our counterparties at the G20. This is a big priority of ours.
Secretary, you said that this is not about targeting China, but this is aimed at a Chinese bank. Does it speak to a message that you're trying to send to China in any way, specifically right before the G20? Or is this really an indication of how limited your options are in terms of just dealing with North Korea directly?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say in any way it's limited in what our options are. Quite the contrary. We are committed and we will work with everybody, and nothing's off the table. Where we see illicit financing, we will stop it. And there's no message before the G20. The message to everybody at the G20 is this is a serious issue. We're going to work with everybody. But if there is illicit financing going on, we will cut it off from the U.S. financial system, which has significant impacts.
Just to follow up, you're saying that in no way this is a message aimed at China.
I specifically said in my comments this wasn't aimed at China. We continue to lurk. We continue to work with them. Again, this is about North Korea, and this is about how serious we're taking this, and kind of whether it's China or anybody else, we will take this seriously.
Will this help with the release of the 3 Americans still detained?
I'm not going to make any comments about that.
Deanna Christen's question here, you say, quote, the president is firmly committed that we will cut the money off to North Korea until they behave properly. How are you defining success with that? In other words, what are you exactly looking for?
I think you're going to know success when you see it.
Well, no, I'm asking how do you and the administration do it?
Again, I think you're going to. I think everybody will know success. Their behavior is unacceptable, and it will be very clear. Kind of, we want them to stop doing tests, the ballistic missile programs, and others. It's very clear.
Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you something that a lot of people don't understand, and you're uniquely qualified to explain. The administration and Congress are saying there will be $321 billion in savings from the health care bills that are out there. But isn't that because people and benefits are being taken away? So isn't this really just a takeaway?
Not at all, okay? And one of the flaws of the scoring on the CBO, on this, when you look at the number of people, is that, again, there's a lot of people, when given the option, will decide not to elect to take this health care because it's a bad deal. That doesn't mean people are losing health care. I think everybody knows Obamacare was just a giant tax hike on the economy. It slowed down the economy. It's another reason why we've continued to have sub 2% growth for the last 8 years. And this administration is 100% focused on creating economic growth, creating jobs, creating proper wages, and getting this economy back to 3% or higher. Yes, right here in the front.
First of all, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I've got a couple of dorky finance questions. Could you talk about, just if push came to shove, would you advise for prioritizing debt payments or not? And do you believe that CFIUS review of Chinese investments into the U.S. should be more careful or more involved?
Well, again, let me just make a comment on CFIUS. I do chair CFIUS. I take it very seriously, and I can tell you the reviews are very careful and very involved no matter who's on the other side. It's very important for national security, and we will use that to the maximum powers. And in regards to prioritization, again, I think that Congress should act quickly, raise the debt ceiling, and we should pay our debts on time.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I was going to say congratulations too.
Thank you.
2 questions. First, you were a participant along with Madame Lagarde at the last IMF World Bank meeting, and you certainly know there was some concern about what the future U.S. policy is toward involvement with the International Monetary Fund. What is the U.S. policy toward that and toward involvement in financial relief in the Eurozone?
So let me just say I've had the pleasure of meeting with Christine, at least a dozen times. I think the IMF plays a very important role in looking at currency and world economies. The IMF was very helpful in regards to stabilizing the Greece situation and working with Europe. I think that could have been a major problem this summer that would have had significant concerns to the markets and the economy, and I think she was a very important part of those negotiations.
Well, my second question was, how do you feel about maintaining the U.S. level of support at the IMF at the current level, and specifically as a part of the relief for Greece, because the U.S. role is through the IMF, in relief of the Greek financial crisis.
Yeah, well, let me just comment. The IMF commitment to Greece was quite small. I'm not even sure that Greece are necessarily going to use that, so I think the significance was really more of a stamp of approval. And again, there's no direct cost to the U.S. or the taxpayers. And we're supportive of the IMF, although we'll look at our contributions to the IMF like we look at all contributions very carefully and making sure we're spending the taxpayers' money properly. In the back, yes.
Clarify which entities are being sanctioned, because the paperwork that OFAC sent out also includes Dalian Global Unity Shipping, 2 Chinese individuals, does not mention the Bank of Dandong in that paperwork. So is it 4 total entities?
So there's 2 different actions. There is a FinCEN action against the Bank of Dandong, and then there are the 3 OFAC sanctions, as you've pointed out.
So we should see a release from which part of Treasury? You said FinCEN?
You will see FinCEN. There'll also be a release on the bank.
Communicate this in advance to Beijing? That
Again,
this was gonna happen?
I'm not making any comments on our behind the scenes, how we can communicate.
Tax reform, you're a mathematical man. What are the chances that we get a 15% corporate tax rate or a 25% corporate tax rate in the final bill?
Let me just comment. Tax reform is a pass-fail exercise, okay? And we're going to get this passed for a plan that's good for the American public. So we are working closely with the House and the Senate, and we're going to get a bill that's passed that's going to be great for this economy, great for Americans, putting people back to work.
Is it a revenue neutral exercise? Is it a revenue neutral
How is
exercise?
it possible for reducing the funding source for the healthcare to lead to lower premiums and expanded coverage?
Again, I'm here primarily to talk about sanctions and tax reform, but I will comment again on health care, although it's not my primary area. The health care that's been in place is a bad deal for the American public, okay? And that's why a lot of people aren't using it, okay? It was a giant tax hike to the American economy, and premiums have been going up a ton. So we're looking at making the system more competitive so people can actually afford it.
Secretary, we heard from your counterpart at the Department of Homeland Security that airports all over the world have to step up aviation security because there's this threat. This is the product of a months-long discussion within the interagency process that resulted in yesterday's decision. I'm wondering if you, sir, are convinced that the potential security risk, are you satisfied that the security risk outweighs any potential economic risk if, for example, certain airlines are cut off or certain airports are cut off if they don't comply?
Well, let me just say, I can think of nobody better than General Kelly to protect our country in this position. Again, I've had the opportunity to discuss these issues with him at the National Security Council. I'm not going to comment specifically, but let me make it clear. The safety of the American public is our utmost concern, and we will never, ever put economic issues, okay, where we will risk the lives of the American public.
Mr. Secretary, on tax reform, are you going to be revenue neutral? And if the CBO and JCT say you don't get the growth or the revenue, what are you going to do?
Okay, again, let me just first say there will be complete transparency when we come out with the plan. We are in the process of listening sessions. We've literally met with hundreds and hundreds of CEOs, think tanks, various different groups. I was over at the House twice today talking with people at the House of Representatives in groups. We've been at the Senate. We're listening. And as we develop this plan, we've said we're going to have a responsible plan that is paid for. And we do believe in dynamic scoring, and we're going to take that into account.
Mr. Secretary, the GDP for the first quarter came out today at 1.4%. It was slightly better than economists anticipated. But during the campaign, the president repeatedly promised to have growth rates of between 3 and 4%. 2 questions. First, how much of that 1.4% is attributable to the actions of this administration or inactions? And secondly, when are we going to start seeing the 3 to 4% growth rate that the president promised?
So again, I think I've been very clear on what our projections are for growth, and that we believe that we can get to 3% or higher GDP. We've been very clear that that's not this year, that's not next year. It will take some time to scale in. Our projection over the 10-year period is actually 2.9%, which I think is quite conservative. scaling up to 3 and staying there, which I think both the president and I believe we can do better than 3%. So our projections in the budget are quite conservative. I think that to the extent we can get health care passed, to the extent we can get tax reform passed, to the extent we can roll back regulatory issues, which we're working on very carefully, both in financial and in energy and in other areas, we are very comfortable that we will hit these growth projections. I'm going to take 2 more questions, and then I'm going to have to turn it over to the superstar over here. No, yes.
Okay, thank you. The president said before that if China is not going to help solve the North Korea problem, then the U.S. will. He's made it clear that he doesn't think that China is currently doing enough. So where does he stand on the U.S. taking unilateral action? And is there a deadline, such as G20, maybe an ultimatum, or a deadline for which the U.S. would need to, that China would need to do more?
I think the president has made it very clear that if there are deadlines, he is not going to advertise those deadlines. So I am not going to make any specific comments as to whether he has a deadline or if he has a deadline, when it is. That would make absolutely no sense. I can assure you we will have conversations with our G20 counterparts about this next week, and we've been having these conversations, and we will continue to do more on this. One more question. You're right here.
There was a little bit of a legislative snafu, but it does appear that the House and Senate will pass sanctions legislation related to Russia, includes a broad range of sanctions. I don't think we've gotten a straight answer from the White House on whether the president would support that. Does the administration support that? Is Treasury prepared to implement those sanctions?
Well, let me just be clear. Again, not only the sanctions that we have on North Korea today, we have sanctions on Iran already. We will continue to put more sanctions on Iran around their ballistic missile and other programs. You've seen we've used sanctions in other areas. We will continue to use these. So notwithstanding anything Congress passes, I can assure you this administration and the Treasury Department will use sanctions to the maximum amount available by law. We don't need Congress to tell us to put on more. We're going to do more whether they tell us or not. But anyway, we look